what is Synapse?
Well, it's a great question, a common one. Synapse is really all about doing enterprise analytics at scale. If you want to do that in Azure, there's one answer. That is Synapse. So instead of having to pick multiple technologies, which is challenging for organizations, they really struggle with it. Different analytics engines, different data integration engines can be very complicated. The answer is one thing: Synapse.
Okay, I like it. So what's the problem does it solve for your customers?
Well, I mentioned just a second ago about having to pick and choose, right? And let's just focus on one aspect of that: analytics engines. Mm-hmm. Now, what we see in the world is people are having to use two different worlds of engines: Spark and data warehousing. That T-SQL, SQL, and these are really different worlds, different technologies, different query languages in some cases, different security models, different experiences, differences all over the place. And what we see in organizations, they're doing these enterprise analytic solutions. They're failing often. They're failing because these two technical silos of big data, Spark, and data warehousing, SQL, don't work well together, right? And because those technologies don't work well together, the organizations themselves silo the teams. In the same organization, we'll see a Spark team and a SQL team, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So, often you'll see us talk about Synapse as limitless. And often when we say that, we do mean works at any scale, any size of data. And that is what that means. But it also means erasing limits between these two worlds. We're talking about not just size of data, but erasing the boundaries so that you can have shared metadata, shared data, a unified security model, right? A unified coding experience and debugging experience and monitoring experience. All these things are the limits and the boundaries we're removing to make it one solution.
That's nice. That's nice. I really like that all together. Okay, so what's the most common scenario where people are using, or like where Synapse will shine?
Well, the most common thing that people are doing with Synapse is a pattern. It's classically known as the modern data warehouse pattern. And it's very simple, and I've seen it replicated from the smallest organizations to the largest, from gigabytes to literally petabytes, and in some cases, exabytes. And really, it's all about landing data from different sources, on premises in the cloud, into a lake in the cloud, right? Files. Then, you need a data integration system for that. And then that data has to become prepared or cooked, as we might say, cleaned up. So that's another stage in this process. And then you start using big data maybe for machine learning, training models, right? So you cook and clean, you train models, you do your AI and ML. And then finally, of course, you take that data and you put it in a serving layer. Right? That's really the data warehousing layer, because then you use normal SQL to serve it to tools like Tableau or Power BI. So that pattern is what Synapse is just built to, out of the box, make possible quickly. And of course, as you can see, that pattern will evolve and, real-time streaming analytics gets added. So those kinds of scenarios, that's where the sweet spot is for Synapse.
Lovely. You know what? You got me hooked. Can we see it? Can you show me a little bit how it works?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let me move over to what you can see now. This is called Synapse Studio, and this is its homepage, right? Now, I've got a lot to demo, but the easiest way of understanding what's going on here is that I have a lot of code, and I'm going to access data wherever it is. So I'm going to go to the Data Hub. And in the Data Hub, you can see I have Workspace Data and linked data. And then in the Workspace Data, I have these databases. And in the linked part of the Data Hub, I have data sources that are not in Synapse, but somewhere else in Azure. And I'll show you how Synapse just can work with all your data in Azure. Let's start with the Workspace Data. This is sort of the data that's owned by Synapse. Now, of course, I have a SQL pool, what used to be called a Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Now we just call them dedicated SQL pools. And in it, I have a classic native SQL table. And just to show you, of course, I can do a select top 100 on this, and it would just work, right? It's exactly what you'd expect to see in a system that uses T-SQL to query data, right? And you can see the query was written and it ran, and I'll just close that because that's what the product is supposed to do easily with native T-SQL. But what about Spark databases? Now you can see right here, I have a Spark database, and inside the Spark database, there's a Spark table. And this is the same data, but this is a Spark table, which means the metadata is now in this Hive compatible metastore, and the data is in Parquet files in the data lake. And I can right click here and take a look. I can of course create a new Spark notebook, and that'll load it to a data frame. I'm going to ignore that for now because everyone's very familiar. Spark notebooks will work with Spark databases. What we've added is native T-SQL compatibility with Spark databases. So I can do a select top 100 rows, and it does exactly just pure normal T-SQL on the Spark database. And I can run it, and it will just kick off and finish this query. You didn't have to do anything. It will just work, right? Now, what you're seeing here is that the SQL query spun up some resources. It took about 8 seconds. If I run this a second time, it'll just work very quickly now. You can see there, it took 2 seconds, and it might be 0 seconds. It just kind of depends on the day and the time. That's using our built-in serverless SQL pool engine, right? It's a massive scale, enabling T-SQL analytics on Spark databases. So those are databases inside Synapse. What about, I mentioned, we'll work with your data wherever it is. Let's pick 3 interesting cases, right? The first is Blob Storage. And I have another data set in Blob Storage called the famous New York City taxi cab data. I'm not going to demo the query because I have the same data also in another storage account over here called in the Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. And if I click in here, you can see there's going to be some files here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to query those. Now, instead of rewriting all these things, I'm going to do the right clicks and find the file here and create a SQL script or a Spark table. But instead of doing all that, let me just find a pre-built one. And so that was a file in a lake, a Parquet file. So of course, I can just query it directly. And this is what the T-SQL looks like. Again, this isn't a Spark database. This is a a Parquet file, and I can just run it. And again, it will just go kick off a query. And you didn't have to specify the schema. It just worked. It just worked. And likewise, Cosmos DB was another thing we talk about. I have Cosmos DB, and I can just do a spark.read on a Cosmos DB container, and then using Synapse link for Cosmos DB, which automatically gets data from the Cosmos DB transactional store into an analytics store, it just works in Synapse. So wherever your data is, Synapse can use it.
I love it. Very clear. Thank you for your explanation.